Urban renewal is something that has occurred in many cities all over the United States. From the demolition of old and worn down houses to the removal of old factories or stores, or anything else of the like, urban renewal can take form in a variety of different ways. These ways depend on location, situation, population, and many other factors. However, one such thing that people typically might not realize is the effect of urban renewal on smaller cities. For larger cities like New York City, Columbus, Seattle, or Chicago, urban renewal is extremely common. Despite this, larger cities aren't the only places affected by urban renewal. Smaller urban areas, to the point that calling one a city might be an overstatement, can also be affected by urban renewal just as much as other cities, such as what happened with Lithonia, Georgia. Lithonia was heavily impacted by urban renewal, but due to the fact that it is a small city, not much information is provided about the projects that occurred here. To start, it is necessary to learn about Lithonia as an early city before any of its urban renewal projects began. The town was formed in the late 1840s near Atlanta, a pair of crossroads, quite literally given the name Crossroads. Only 100 people lived here, until a decade later, where the town was established formally as Lithonia, or the City of Stone. Lithonia, both in its early years and even today, is primarily a mining town, with their first granite quarry opening in 1879. Granite would become very important to Lithonia's way of life down the line past this point. Decades later, in 1945, the Atlanta-Augusta Railroad is finished, further strengthening the granite industry in Lithonia, Georgia. However, the biggest impact Lithonia experiences is the building of a new interstate, the I-20. Because of this, the population of Lithonia shifts from a more local, close-knit community to a more suburban, spread-out town. To try and bring life back into the city, a committee of voters in the city approved of an urban renewal plan in 1963 to tear down some of the older parts of the city and replace them with newer buildings and public space. The urban renewal plan would entirely demolish a large section of downtown Lithonia, including but not limited to several historic landmarks, such as the train depot, a fire station, and one of the city's oldest churches, the Lithonia Baptist Church. These buildings weren't particularly as important to the city as a whole at the time, which would lead to them all being destroyed to build the plaza. The residents of Lithonia simply decided that a new and more modern-styled strip mall would be better for the health and growth of their city than a few of the older buildings that were already there. The city grid was also changed during these renovations, transforming the downtown city from a simple grid-like pattern that was easy to traverse on foot to a large mega block with several small-style buildings sitting in the middle. Around these newer buildings was a large area for parking, further encouraging visitors to take their cars if they wanted to go to Lithonia Plaza, which was the name of the urban renewal project and location. When the Plaza project was first completed, it was celebrated by most residents of the city for bringing life into downtown Lithonia, with new shopping centers and the new and current location of the city's town hall. However, in the present day, Lithonia Plaza has fallen from the grace it once had. One building in the plaza had fallen into a state of disrepair, leading to it having to be demolished only a few years ago. Lithonia Plaza had also shrunk in size when it comes to how many people were using the space. To try and remedy this, the city has been making several plans and attempts within the last decade or so to fix up and revitalize the plaza in order to encourage people to come back to it again. One such example of these plans has already occurred in 2020. Due to poor and run-down quality of some of the area, renovations were made to demolish part of the plaza and replace it with a newer, more modern building, considering the previous were over half a century old by this point. These buildings, called the Granite Crossing Apartments, are like the opposite of a sore thumb compared to the surrounding area, as it is quite obviously differently styled and higher quality than many of the other buildings nearby. Now, don't get me wrong, these new buildings are objectively nice, high quality, more modern looking buildings, and really do make the actual plaza itself feel better, to simply put it. But this does not actually mean that the buildings fit in with the surrounding area. To make matters even more noticeable, on the same block are several buildings that are likely a century old or possibly even older, just 100 or so feet away. This leads to Lithonia Plaza being a good example of an urban palimpsest. Now, what exactly is an urban palimpsest? In my opinion, an urban palimpsest is a perfect way to describe what happened with Lithonia Plaza over the last 80 years. What once was a grid-like street with dozens of shops and buildings was demolished to form a large plaza area, with buildings in the center surrounded by parking areas. Then, most, but not all, of this area was torn down again, to be replaced by nicer and more modern buildings, and yet again this happens, leading to a single street block having differently styled buildings from several decades spanning just hundreds of feet away from each other at most, and even then this might be an over-exaggeration. With buildings like the Christian Fellowship Community and the Flava Styling Team, with buildings older than the plaza itself right next to the Lithonia City's mayor's office, which was built with the original creation of the plaza, the difference is already jarring. It is only made worse when, right next to these buildings, is the original mall-styled plaza, which part of was demolished only a couple of years ago to be replaced by yet another new building, the Granite Crossing Apartments that were mentioned earlier. I heavily recommend looking at images of this, as the 4 differently styled areas, all residing right next to each other, is a textbook perfect example of the mess of a palimpsest that is the Lithonia Plaza Urban Renewal project. What were the outcomes of the urban renewal in Lithonia? Not much was ultimately changed for the health of the city over the longer term, but when it comes down to what it did for the sake of the city, it almost seems like a thorn in the mayor's side more than anything else. With articles talking about the poor condition of the plaza from a few years ago, to several redevelopment projects of a redevelopment project, it seems that it ultimately wasn't the most effective addition to the city. Despite this, the plaza itself is massive. Literally. Looking at a map of Lithonia, Georgia, you can see that the Lithonia Plaza is right in the middle and is roughly around 1/5 as wide as the actual city itself. An already small city now almost seems to feel smaller than it already did, due to how much space is being taken up by a single plaza area in the very center of it. Now, due to the several redevelopments that were made, Lithonia Plaza really isn't that bad. Over this documentary, it might sound like it was an utter failure, but that really isn't the case, as it had its pros and cons. But, what can we learn from the history of Lithonia and their infamous Lithonia Plaza? Lithonia Plaza tells us of 2 tales about urban renewal. On one hand, it shows us how urban renewal isn't always a positive in the long run, as Lithonia Plaza was only heavily used for a couple of decades, and now, half a century later, is in a very poor state until recent redevelopment projects a few years ago. On the other hand, the urban renewal projects in the city of Lithonia destroyed several historical buildings and sites that were anywhere from 100 to 150 years old, that were historical landmarks as of now. Actions like this are more regretted in the present day, as the drive to preserve our history has become much more popular in society. Steps have been taken forward to try and help with this, with the city's mayor proposing a plan in 2020 to try and make the history of Lithonia more influential to the city. The acquiring of historical records of photographs, the preservation of older locations, old newspapers, and anything of the like are things that the city are wanting to protect in order to not lose any more of their identity as the City of Stone.